We will start in 30 seconds as more and more attendees are joining. Okay, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, good year to everyone on this webinar. It's a pleasure to have you here today. And yes, it's another webinar in our lives, but we have a distinguished panel to help us through some current events that are facing your country, your clients, you individually. So up here now, we have our panel speakers, and they're going to bring their views on many different topics, but more recently, we finally have a new president in the U.S. Exciting, yay! But this overshadows maybe Brexit, maybe COVID too. So we want to see from our panelists what their views are on many different topics. So let's move to the next slide and get this started. We want to hear from you guys out there that as questions are discussed or you have questions of your own, post them to the chat box. We will try to get to those today, but more importantly, and I think if there's a question that we pose and you have a response, please add that response, your views, to the chat box. So some breaking news as we go to the next slide, and I think it's going to be the theme of what's happening out there. We're going to be talking about the election, as I mentioned, COVID-19 and Brexit. But just today, Biden signed an order that the government must buy America. It's kind of the bring it home attitude. And clearly, if we do that, many countries will also bring it home. And we're seeing that over the last 10 months as COVID has made challenges to logistics and sourcing of goods and services. But we're going to talk more about those issues in a moment. And clearly, with that news, that breaking news, there's also this new variant of the virus, COVID. And while we may be very prepared because of our experience, this may have more dramatic impacts on our businesses and our social lives and our spending habits. And many said this is a new norm. I believe there's a new norm coming, and we're just going to have to live and change as things develop in the world. So why don't we go through and hit some questions up? And I just want to do a quick survey, guys. It's kind of an exercise, thumbs up, thumbs down. And to warm things up here, you believe 2021 will be better from a business standpoint than 2020? Thumbs up, thumbs down, even. Come on. All right. So we have a lot of optimistic people on this panel, so that's good news. And when you look back on 2020, I think these guys are right. For many industries, many businesses, they probably had the best year ever. But with any challenge, there are those that win, there are those that lose, those other opportunities may adjust. But let's see what 21 brings to your clients and to your business. So I would like to hear what your clients are discussing, but I'm going to give you a little overview. Biden, he's had proposals to the tax law. He's going to increase individual rates up to 39.6%. Capital gains rates currently at 23% will go to 39.6%. Capital gains rates, yeah, drive investments, but we'll see. But more importantly, corporations drive business, they drive employment. He's proposing to increase rates to 28%. And maybe we're still a tax shelter or tax sensitive environment here, but I don't think so. The key here is there's going to be offshore penalties of 10% if you do business offshore from the U.S. There's going to be incentives to manufacture in the U.S. There's going to be incentives to create jobs in the U.S. There's going to be an increase in what we call the GILTI tax. And I don't need to go into those in a lot of detail, but tax law will change business decisions, foreign direct investments, inbound, outbound, and our panelists will address how that impacts their clients and the advice they're giving. So with that said, I want to kind of jump into the foreign direct investment. Mark, why don't we just start with you on what you might be seeing with your clients in the news, more importantly, what the news says out there about U.S. foreign direct investment as driven by Biden.
Sure. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I think what since the election, we're seeing it's a positive impact from the Biden administration, expected to be positive. I just what we're seeing in our media is that, you know, joining the climate change, the Paris Initiative, getting back involved in the World Trade Organization, or organization that it's seen as possibly a much more collaborative administration, and will, although, as you say, it's bring back America, we feel that, particularly from a European perspective, that from a business perspective, it'll bring more opportunity.
Okay, and vice versa, going into the U.S., even with the rates?
Even with the rates, because I think, you know, I think from an FDI perspective, of course, tax is always a consideration. But I think US business doesn't decide to come to Europe for the tax rates. I think it's the same with European businesses and Irish businesses going into the States. It's definitely and certainly an important consideration. But US companies, I speak from Ireland, they come for the talent, and they come because we're English speaking. They come because it's a good place to do business. And tax is a consideration, but it's certainly not just it. And I think it's the same going back to the US.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, as you look at business decisions, what are they looking for? New channels for sales, revenue, be it service or goods, cheaper labor, cheaper material, quick deliveries. So even though our rates go up and down and they drive policy, businesses will still look for the best opportunity to get their goods and services out there. So yes, that'll be very interesting. Now, we've got two great neighbors, Canada and Mexico. And there's a lot of trade between those countries and the U.S. So, Brett, any thoughts about foreign direct investment in or out of the U.S. from a Canadian standpoint?
From our perspective, we don't really see much. Obviously, we're hoping that relationships with the United States will be better, but you know, we don't know. I mean, Biden already dropped the Keystone project, which is not really good for you know, relations in Canada, because oil and gas exports are Canada's #1 export, and don't really understand too much about that, because you know, the demand for oil and gas is not going to decrease in the United States. Obviously, he promised that in his, you know, campaign promise. He wants clean air and alternative energy, and you know, I'm just puzzled with that, because Trump, a businessman, says get that pipeline going so we'll get oil and gas cheaper. You're still going to need it. It's going to cost more expensive. It's going to be more expensive. But from a tax perspective, I don't see it changing much, for the simple reason now that your rates are potentially going up to 28%, and our rates corporately are 26.5%. It's pretty close. So before, when Trump lowered the rates, there was a little leakage when you guys came to Canada, because you guys were paying 21. It was higher. Now that it's closer, there's not going to be leakage. And then again, for us to go into the United States, you know, for that extra 1.5% tax, it's not going to really change, because we like to say, you know what, don't let the tax tail wag the business dog. It's the business that we're going to the States for, because it's 10 times bigger than Canada.
Yeah. So in your opinion, you don't think lower tax rates drive business?
Lower tax rates do drive business, but you know, we're not going to cut ourselves off from that market where it's 10 times larger than us. It's just a cost of doing business.
Right. Very good. Or using the transfer pricing rules to make sure that you don't.
That will use to our advantage. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks for that input, Brett. And down to Mexico, Pablo, welcome. Good morning.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, I had this technical problem. Apologies.
With the Biden election, how is Mexico? What's the news in Mexico?
We haven't really got a full perspective on Biden's, let's say, bigger proposal. We do know, and we are considering these potential tax increments, but still, the the corporate tax in the US still will be lower than us, pretty much close. If it goes to 28, Mexico is 30.
Right.
Still, since we believe a lot of our clients from a tax perspective we're going to the US because the US had this 21 with a potential 13 for exports. And with that gone, it's not like Mexico is not going to do more business. It's just that maybe they will probably slow down from a tax perspective, of course, because the 13% corporate tax rate is actually an incredible tax rate, to be honest. So a lot of companies went to the US, form an entity, legal entity, produced with cheap labor in Mexico, went to the US for commercialization, and then export to the world from the US. This may be over now. We have to wait, though. President Biden just came in from Mexico. We don't expect much changes, to be honest. The trade between our two countries, we believe, will remain the same. It's just that it may cost a little bit more.
Right. Yeah. Mexico will remain a great source of labor, material, and manufacturing for sure. So interesting. All right, Raj, help us with the U.S.-India relationship as it relates to this foreign direct investment issue in Biden. I think you had mentioned at one point in time the largest democracy versus the oldest democracy. Comment on that?
Yes, absolutely, Dave. So that's a very good statement you made, the largest democracy and the oldest democracy. So just an example, I'll take a step back and run through that the trade between US-India has gone from 1999 to 2018, has surged from $16 billion to $142 billion. And during the COVID-19 times, the last year, just the trade relationship or the trade between the US-India has gone to $22 billion. Of FDI between US and India. So that showcases that there is a very strong business ties relationship between US and India. And tax, as we were all talking about the tax, absolutely the tax is going to be the driving factor. Knowing very well that the US income tax rate was 21%. India was also trying to par with the US income tax rate. And last year, the income tax rate of any manufacturing company that is trying to set up their operation in India, the Indian government came up with the income tax rate of 15%, just to attract foreign direct investment into India. In addition to that, they also came up with some kind of incentives and benefits to the companies who are trying to set up their manufacturing operation, providing them land. So we do see that there will be a cross-border transaction initiative going on between the two countries. Now with the Biden coming in, we do see that the India-US share, they have a global strategic partnership with all this trade going on, cross-border trade. And also last year, they signed a significant defense partnership between the two countries. And as you're well aware that F-16 now is manufactured in India and exported out of India. So that's a relationship that we do. But with Biden coming, I think one of the key things that we have heard recently, as of last week, that Kamala Harris, who is originally from India, she has an Indian roots. We do see that there's going to be strong strategic partnership growing significantly between the two countries, with Kamala Harris driving the relationship between US and India. And also, as of last week, we did see that the Biden administration has appointed 20 Indians into its team, to focus on the US-India strategic partnership.
Very interesting. And clearly there's a discussion on sourcing and logistics. Any comments on the China versus India challenge opportunity?
That is absolutely one of the key things that our Prime Minister Modi had focused on when the COVID-19 situation hit in and China was the target. He wanted to attract businesses to come to India. And for that, he came up with certain policies, I'll just tell you one story that came up last year during the COVID-19 situation. Jeff Bezos was on a 3-day tour to India. And as a part of Make in India initiative, he announced that he will be investing about $1 billion in digitizing small and medium businesses in India. He said that they are going to use an Amazon size, scope, and scale, and Amazon's global footprint to export outside of India, $10 billion of US make in India products. So this shows that the shift of a company like Amazon, that they want to move out of China and look at India as a country to start exporting. And he made a very good statement last year in his interview. He said India has something special, the democracy, this is going to be an Indian century. And he said that he will make one more, he said one more prediction. And in that he said this 21st century, the most important alliance is going to be the alliance between India and the US, the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. So this was his statement, trying to say that how these two countries are going to be the next world power, superpower in trade. And that basically was the message to China, that I'm shifting myself from China to India, and India is going to be a destination for export.
So the future is now, as business advisors and tax advisors, you're steering your clients in the right direction. But it seems to me that if the U.S. has a bring it home mandate or incentive, what does that do with foreign direct investments in each of your countries? And by the way, audience, we do have Nick Farmer as one of our panelists. He is remaining invisible, but Nick, maybe you can comment on rates. We're spending a lot of money. Government funds are trying to keep economies afloat, and what rates and you may be seeing in the UK.
Okay, thanks, Dave, and apologies that my camera doesn't seem to be working today. Just to put this into context, I think the UK have very warmly welcomed Joe Biden's appointment in the US. The UK government clearly want to get close to him, and Boris Johnson was very keen to have an initial call with him, which I believe happened last week. Interestingly, the media picked up on the fact that they both use the same slogan, which is Build Back Better. So they've already got something in common, and they are both have a love of trains as well. So clearly off to a good start there, that there's a start of a close relationship. And the UK was, as it went through transitioning from the being within the EU, was clearly saying that it was looking to put in some arrangement with the US, have a trade agreement. That was touted as something which would be a positive outcome of Brexit. That, of course, has not happened yet, and I don't think it's high on the Biden administration, but it's something that the UK, now it's free to enter into global trade agreements, is very keen to do. I mean, it's quite noticeable that Biden himself is actually would have preferred the UK to stay within the EU. He's got strong Irish roots, of course, coming from Ballina on the west coast, his grandfather. And those roots obviously are playing quite a strong part in his positive attitude towards the EU, and wanting to see the UK have a very harmonious relationship with the EU. So there's a lot to play for here, actually, with the new US administration coming in. From a UK perspective, I think we're at a bit of a crossroads. We'll pick up on the impact of Brexit in a bit, but obviously with COVID and the amount of debt, there's the question, how is that potentially going to be paid back? And in the media, we're seeing reports that the Chancellor is potentially favouring increasing corporation tax rates here. So at the moment, we have a 19% flat rate of corporation tax. And the UK has always positioned itself as a low business tax economy within Europe. So whether we do increase our rates or whether we do look to compete for inbound investment and have a more flexible rate, perhaps for different sectors, the UK certainly has a slightly freer hand now in where it goes with its tax policy and how it does attract foreign direct investment. As you know, Dave, there's always been a very close tie between UK, US business, lots of trade between the two economies. And I think that will just continue, even if the US tax rates are going up, as Brett said earlier. I mean, actually, it's not the tax rates that will really drive the investment here, it's the market. The US is such an important market for UK companies. And we'll have to look at what that increase in tax rate means and where people are making their profit. But I think the US is going to be a very significant market for the UK in the future, now that it's not so closely aligned with the EU, and the tax rates is a factor, but it's not the big one. It's looking for the market where UK companies can export and sell into.
Good input. So, Chris, you've had the benefit of listening to the other countries and other panelists on how the Biden election may impact global trade. Let's have a German perspective. Is this good, or is this bad, or are you guys neutral on the U.S.?
Yeah, well, I think I can speak for the vast majority of the Germans that we are very deep feeling of relief about the latest political developments in the US, and not only for economic reasons, but also for political reasons, so that we can build up and reconstruct the old bridges that are between Germany and the United States. What the business investments are concerned, well, I think we have to distinguish those business which are already there, and there's a big business community already have invested huge amounts of money in the United States, and for them the latest development or in the tax legislation, this will not have any influence at all on what is already located in the United States. Maybe if we talk about new entries, new investments, then for them one can put almost a rhetorical question: have you ever seen that higher taxes encourage investments or investors? And well, if you put a question this way, the answer is clear: no, high taxes will not encourage somebody to invest. But then we come to the next point. Why do people invest in the United States? And if a German entrepreneur, a German company invests in the United States, it's not because of lower taxes, because it's driven by the market, by skills of the people, and so on, and business chances. Tax are costs, not business chance. And investing in the US means making business chances. And there we have everything which drives the business. And I think the new political situation will encourage people in a way that even a little higher tax rate will not hinder those investments. And by the way, if a country like the United States increase tax in such times, this is also a sign of self-confidence. You say that we are in a position that we can afford higher taxes from the companies established there and investing there. And because we can do that because we are so attractive. So actually this is not a weakness, it's a strength. And by the way, you have to put it in connection with the new budget situation worldwide due to the COVID costs. There is a lack of revenues in the budget of the states. And everybody knows that one day somebody will have to pay for it. And the instrument to reinvest these lack in revenues, this is the tax. And if the United States go ahead, I predict that we will see such developments in other sophisticated economies as well. And the experience of the last 10, 20 years that corporate tax rates worldwide fell down, I think this tendency is stopped. and the United States are going ahead, and I'm sure that other countries in Europe will follow. And one prediction in this context, more in a tech sense, I'm sure that the anti-BEPS initiative will accelerate, and that we will see a tendency that the countries will fight more for that piece of the tax cake. Under the headline of fair tax allocation, we will see not only higher tax rates, we will see more severe rules in order to locate taxes between one jurisdiction and the other. So, to make a long story short, I think the United States have become much more attractive in the last 2 months for German investors. Higher taxes will not hinder those investments. And so, yeah, that's it.
Chris, great analysis.
First analysis on this.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So it's kind of an interesting discussion. You know, we've got the US, we've got COVID, we've got Brexit, we've got other issues out there. Can I ask you guys what you're seeing, what you're hearing from your clients that are trading globally? You know, is it more of a discussion on the US? Is it more on Brexit? Is it COVID? You know, how do they move forward? How do they move their businesses so they can generate more sales, logistics? So why don't we start back to Mark, you know, in particular, any question jump out at you that you're hearing from your clients?
Sure. And Nick, I think this is the first time I've ever had to correct you, but I'll just have to correct you on the pronunciation of Ballina, County Mayo, is where Joe Biden.
Ballina, of course.
I'll correct that. Okay. But listen, what we're seeing, Dave, the only conversation that we're seeing is Brexit related. That's the number one, and our clients, it's number one. Funnily enough, I think Brexit is causing a lot of confusion, and where it's hitting really is the medium and mid-tier businesses. That's who are being hit the hardest, because it was those businesses who couldn't prepare really last year for it because they didn't know what it was going to be, and now the large businesses and companies and multinationals out there were prepared for it a little bit better and have the resources to be able to be prepared for it. And they're saying to the mid-tier businesses that are supplying into them, well, it's your problem. You sort it out. You just get us goods delivered, duty paid, if you like, right? And on the other side, if those mid-tier businesses who have lots of smaller customers, the smaller clients don't have the resources to be able to gear up for customs and the paperwork and what it is. So it's those mid-tier businesses then also gear up to deliver duty paid. So there's a lot of that's bringing a lot of confusion and and I can see that being the number one complexity for Irish business and UK business and European business generally throughout the year, you know?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Investments are kind of a long-term decision, return on your investment, and the world's in such chaos. You know, is the decision process more in the short term or long term with your clients, or is it both?
I think it's both. I think the short term on the custom side, etc., will be sorted out, and it'll probably be sorted out this year. But businesses are still investing, and we're seeing like M&A is probably up, if anything, and we're seeing it across energy, across professional services, across tech. So businesses are still definitely investing for the long term, and probably at a level surprising, even with COVID restrictions that are there. Businesses are still able to operate in an investment world, and to be able to invest in new business.
Okay, good. And what about Canada? I know it's cold up there. Maybe nobody's having any kind of discussions, Brett, but maybe you have some input on Biden versus Brexit versus COVID and what questions you're seeing from your clients.
You know what? He was just inaugurated on Wednesday, and we really haven't had any discussions regarding Biden at this time. But as I said, you know, from a you know, relative or comparative tax perspective, not going to be a big change for us. As I said, it's business opportunities that drive the investment both in Canada and outbound. In terms of Brexit, you know what? I have to be honest with you that most of our clients, or actually, I don't know of one client that has actually expanded into the UK. But sure, we have lots of clients that, you know, do work in and expand into Europe. And with CETA, the Canadian European Trade Agreement, I mean, we're, you know, focused on, you know, dealing with Germany and Ireland, and I think those are two of the major business partners that that Canada chooses or our clients choose when they expand abroad. In terms of COVID, I know you have a whole section about that later, so we can discuss that later. In terms of that, you know, we talked about, you know, Chris talked about, you know, tax rates accelerated and how are we going to pay for COVID, and you know, that's absolutely true. I mean, for us in Canada, we're not going to increase corporate rates because we want to remain competitive. But in terms of other taxes, like our GST, HST, which is like European VATs, or our capital gains rates, sure, those are going to go up to pay for COVID. And those are targets for people that, you know, spend more money. You want to tax the rich, and you know, who better than, you know, what better tax system to do so than VAT? Because, you know, the rich, they spend more money and then they pay their VAT or GST, HST, and same thing with investment. And you know, to talk about the US and increasing the 28%, to me, you know, when you have all these businesses that are not in the United States that are not doing so well because of COVID, you know what? You pay tax on your bottom line. And, you know, I mean, I guess you can ask me if you're going to ask me the next question or not, but, you know, Trump brought in GILTI, the Global Intangible Low Taxed Income. And that was basically to, again, get the rich, like we're talking the Apples, the Amazons, the Googles. And you know what? You know, you had asked me before, you know, don't you think that tax drives business? Well, I think the stock market may be affected for like the Apples and Googles and Amazons, because absolutely they are making huge profits during COVID. Their profits have never been higher. Their stock price has never been higher. And that 28%, Biden is using that to, you know, pay for COVID, and that's where you're going to see the biggest effects on the biggest money makers. With the, you know, that's who's being affected, the GILTI and the 28%, et cetera.
Good points, Brett. Thanks for that insight. Moving
Anytime.
back to the UK, Nick, here's your opportunity to correct Mark on any words that he said. So what are your clients asking you?
Well, I mean, Mark's comments were actually spot on, so I can't correct him, unfortunately. You know, we are seeing the same here, really. You know, the fallout from leaving the EU is the biggest issue that UK companies that are trading internationally are facing. Just to recap on this, though, you know, just before the end of last year, we weren't even sure we were going to have a deal. There was still the possibility there was going to be no deal here. And when a deal was announced on Christmas Eve, there was a huge sense of relief in the business community. A no deal would have been absolutely disastrous, whereas having a deal obviously puts some arrangements in place between the UK and EU. And on the face of it, when it was announced by Boris Johnson, he promoted it as the cakiest treaty, i.e. one where we could have our cake and eat it. We could retain our sovereignty, but we could also have full access to the market. And that was what many people believed would be the case. But as time has gone on here, we've seen this really isn't true. And there's a lot of barriers to now trading between the UK and the EU. I mean, the agreement itself goes further than any agreement which the EU has put in place, further than the Canadian or the Japanese treaty. So there's lots of good things in it. The problem is that you've moved from a position where you've had free access to the market, you've been in the customs union, the single market, and it's, I think, the first time in history that two sides have negotiated to actually put up barriers rather than to remove them. So it was always going to come with considerable problems, and that's what we're finding. The devil really is in the detail here. And one of the key issues that was never really trailed and that SME businesses were not able to get to grips with because they had no visibility on it was the rules of origin. And those are one of the big problems here for businesses now. You can actually trade free tariff, free quota between the UK and EU if your goods originate in the UK or EU. And that question of origination is the big one now. Where do your goods actually originate from? And SMEs are really struggling to work out, often in very complex supply chains, how their goods originate and then how the treaty actually deals with them. Because when you look at the treaty, you have to understand your sector, your harmonized system code, how that is then treated, what percentage of your goods can potentially come from outside the EU or the UK. Just to give you some examples on this, if you look at dairy, for instance, some dairy products, you could have potentially 20% of the goods originating from outside the UK or EU. But if you're on automotives, for instance, at the moment, that percentage is set at 60%, trailed to fall to 45% in 2027. And every sector is different, the products are different, so you need to know how your product is being treated and then how the origination rules actually work in your instance. And this is tying people up in knots, to be fair. And what we're finding is that freight forwarders, logistics firms, they're not prepared to move goods unless people actually know where they originate from, that they can actually claim preferential tariffs. We've got other barriers as well. For some, we've got health certificates required if you're moving any animal product or any foods. We've got conformity certificates required to ensure that your goods conform with European standards. So there's a whole host of non-tariff barriers here, as well as potentially tariff barriers, which SMEs are having to get to grips with. And it's actually somewhat staggering that the UK government is now advising a lot of these businesses that their best way to deal with this is actually to set themselves up in the EU, and that trading from the UK into the EU market is too problematic right now, and they'd be better to have a hub or a local company through which they can trade with those European customers. Goods is a problem. Services is also a major problem because that agreement just did not cover services. This in itself is very not unusual, because a lot of trade agreements don't cover services, but the fact that the UK economy is 80% services and that trade agreement is almost non-inclusive or anything to do with services, it's like a no deal from a service perspective. Financial services, they're effectively working in a no deal scenario now and needing to be within that European market if they're going to service those customers. And whether any equivalence agreement gets put into place later down the line, that's still to be seen. So services are really struggling. The bureaucracy around the actual movement of goods is causing a problem. So to come back to your original question, this is a key focus. This is what if you're trading internationally, you know, the EU is broadly 50% of all UK exports. So you can imagine that this is where everyone's focus is. How do you trade efficiently with your EU customers? Do you put something into the EU? Do you incur that investment, employ people out there? Those are the sort of questions that SME businesses are now needing to ask themselves. Or do they change their supply chain? Do they try and fall within these rules of origin requirements so that they can get this zero tariff, zero quota arrangement, and hope that over time they come to learn how the paperwork all completes and it sort of smooths itself out? So to some extent, they would say that, you know, we're just dealing with teething problems at the moment, I think has been some of the view that this was always going to be an early stage problem. So I think this is where the focus is for us right now. And until businesses really start to understand this, and we get to a point where trading with the EU becomes comfortable because this new arrangement is understood, it's quite hard to look much wider than that. Although to some extent, some businesses may decide that they're going to look outside the EU because the EU's just come too hard. So, you know, it's like I said earlier, I think we're at a crossroads for a lot of businesses and now having to make decisions that they previously didn't need to you know, think through. A lot of businesses are now needing to understand how they're going to trade globally and what markets they're going to trade into.
Right. Interesting observations there. Thanks for that. Pablo, we all know about China, great sourcing of manufacturing goods, services, and whatnot. We heard Raj talk about India, maybe the up-and-coming tiger, whatever. But what about Mexico? It just seems that there's a great population in Mexico, probably cheap or relatively cheaper labor force dollars. Are you seeing any interest recently in foreign investment, not just from the US, but from other countries, Germany, Canada?
Actually, Dave, we do. I do. For the past year, even with COVID during 2020, we have seen new clients coming into Mexico because of having the majority of their business in the US, but looking for cheap, or like you just said, relatively cheap labor, but also products. So even though we were thinking about a very slow years in terms of investment, foreign investment, we do have some. We did have some companies coming into Mexico. Our biggest concern, and like Brett just said, we'll discuss a little bit later, is COVID. Even though we understand Biden issue and Brexit issue is a worldwide thing to discuss. From a Mexico perspective, tax perspective, or business perspective, we are like 4 or 5 weeks behind Europe or behind Asia in terms of the spread of contagious and the virus. So our biggest concern is that. Now, but from your original question, we do have new investments. It's incredible how people are thinking that Mexico, on the border, our northern border, being so close to the US, we believe and we see ourselves as the biggest business friend, so to speak, with the US. We're associates. We're so close. So on the northern part of the country, a lot of investments in agriculture and manufacturing. But even on the central part of Mexico, the automotive industry is huge. And they have all these new projects in the US working from the mid-Mexico. And like someone said before, and I believe it was Brett, it's not a tax issue. And it was Chris, sorry, it's not a tax issue. Even if the tax rates go a little bit high in the US, or if they don't come down in Mexico, we just came from a tax reform like 3 weeks ago, and we discussed this. We still have some investments going into the US. Not that much into Europe, but we do go into the US. So our biggest foreign investment is coming from Europe and then going into the US.
Good. Okay. So Chris, I'm going to change it up a little bit here. I would love to hear what your clients are asking you, but Clearly, the governments around the world are pouring a lot of dollars into economic stability, and we're either borrowing from each other and maybe reborrowing from each other, or printing money, as they say. Where does this all end? You know, you teach a lot of great students. Where do you think this is heading? Do we have a global collapse? Do we have regional collapses? Do we have inflation? What's your thought there, if any?
Well, difficult questions that is not so easy to answer. Collapse. Well, I do not think that we have a regional or even a collapse which is regional or even bigger than that. But what we will see is collapse of businesses. Not all enterprises will survive. And let me name it as a crisis. We have the COVID crisis, and this will be followed by the economic crisis that we do not see now because of the state aid, but that we will see in the near future. So the logic from this is that we see in single cases collapses, and maybe in single branches we'll see collapses. But I think this is not a regional phenomenon. This is closely linked to certain branches. In the end, this effect will not lead to a big inflation, although under economic or macroeconomic perspective, one could expect that there should be an inflation one day, because if we print more and more money and we ask where is the value, so and if there are, let's say, not value in growth of business, then the other value is called inflation, but inflation is not a value. But at the moment, I think the risk is not so big what this is concerned. What maybe is more interesting is how react the single entrepreneur under these circumstances. Let's say I can speak maybe for some German companies and how they deal with the crisis. And there we observe that you cannot give one answer for all. It is has to be very differentiated. Let's focus, because it's close to the topic here, the German outbound investments. And if we now make a bridge to the Brexit, we will see the economic phenomenon that UK has turned from a very attractive country from the German perspective since the Brexit decision 3 years ago to a less attractive country. And if we discuss with clients the ideal country to invest, not under tax perspective, but for business chances, then the UK is not so attractive at the moment. And yeah, this guides the business decision in other directions, and so other countries will take a benefit from that. And under tax perspective, the Brexit for a German company is in the biggest part are customs tariffs and VAT. These are in the everyday business the substantial issues. My part is the profit taxation, or taxation of profits. And there I can say that Brexit is not a taxable event. So all tax neutral transactions which have been possible in the past because of the membership of the UK in the EU, they are saved by German tax legislation. So we have not to fear any bad impact just because of the Brexit as such. But for future investments, this is different if we transfer assets or try to transfer assets on a tax neutral basis. This is not possible anymore, and mergers from, let's say, UK limited into a German GmbH is not longer possible on a tax neutral way. So you see, there are tax impacts which directly affect the future business decisions. Regarding COVID, the companies deal with one core topic, namely to get state aid from the budget in order to survive. It's a lot of companies only survive by state aid, and this is the COVID topic number one. And what we are discussing in other groups and chats, what is, let's say, other tax impacts such as transfer pricing and so on, this discussion will become practical in the future times, in the very near future, but it's not the practical communication with the client today. This will be the communication and the discussion of tomorrow.
Okay, good insight, Chris. Since we're running out of time here, maybe we can move to the next slide. And apparently we all know that there's two certainties in life, death and taxes, but I think there's a third one too, uncertainty and change. It seems to be in our faces every single day. We talked about winners and losers and change. It's information management. But this COVID-19, we're learning a lot, changing our business models and all that. But with this said, there's a couple of things here on logistics. That anybody seeing any major shifts in logistics, moving goods, services from one location to another? Mark, we had talked about maybe also the Netherlands about stuff being held up at the borders.
Absolutely, and it's back to that Brexit question really, and companies not being able to be ready for it. So it's, I think I've seen an example recently where even in the UK, the result of Brexit is an additional 200 million pieces of paper on an annual basis, 7 billion in order to administer, and a third of the people qualified in order to administer that paper than what is required. So what's happening is that goods are just getting stuck in ports, and even from an Irish perspective, we would have relied on what we call the land bridge. So all of the manufactured in Ireland would have travelled across the Irish Sea by land, by road across the UK onto a ferry and into mainland Europe, and that was cost effective, and about 90% of goods travel that way. But since Brexit, it's essentially stopped, and all of the ferries that would have gone to the UK are now going to France and to the north of Spain and bypassing the UK, essentially because of the need to fill up the paperwork and the concerns about the logistics of goods getting at ports. So yeah, that's been a total change. I think an opportunity that some companies are seeing is around the global workforce piece, because as you said, Dave, the way we all operate our businesses as a result of COVID has totally changed, and the opportunity that's there now in order to recruit people right across the world to do a job, or people to be able to do a job from anywhere, I think is an opportunity for the way business will change and costs. But of course, the complexities around that from international tax obviously have to be watched closely.
Yeah, good.
I think just pitching in there, Dave, one of the things which links into what Mark is saying, this global mobility piece, is that at the moment it's obviously quite difficult to deploy people. And that certainly was the case coming up towards the end of the Trump administration, where we had quite a few clients who were looking to get their companies set up in the US and to send over their staff to operate there, and they just couldn't get the immigration visas in the US. They just weren't being processed. I think there was hold up in that respect. Whether that will change under the Biden administration so that it becomes easier for companies to expand into the US will be interesting, because this whole issue of being able to deploy your staff is clearly also a UK issue now, with the fact that we now have our own immigration rules, and therefore people, if they want to come and live and work in the UK, now need to meet those specific requirements, and that includes anybody from the EU who doesn't already have that right to live and remain in the UK. So this is actually a big challenge that we're finding with global expansion, that you might want to go into a market, it might be attractive market, but can you actually get the people into that market to operate the company for you? Yes, you might be able to recruit locally, get your talent locally, but often you'll want to send somebody in there to actually start up that company and make sure that it's joined up with the rest of the groups. I think that is a big challenge that we are seeing with international expansion at the moment.
Yeah, Dave, I'll just add to what we talked about immigration, because this has been a big challenge for Indian companies or the US companies trying to recruit people from India or offshore to work to India. Offshoring is still an option for US companies because India is a big offshoring hub. But then the visa cap that the previous administration had on H1, L1, and J1 visa was creating a lot of challenges for the US companies to bring people from India. And therefore, what we have seen in the last 1.5 years is that a lot of US companies are now recruiting people in India because of the H1B visa cap, that was triggered last year. But now with the new administration coming in, we do see that what the proposal Biden has is increased the number of visas that he's going to offer, and try to get the cap off on the H1B visa. So I think this will be a good initiative and incentive for the US companies to bring in more people from India to the US and vice versa.
Good, good. So unfortunately, we're out of time, but I posed a question initially to the panel about 20 versus 21. We all had thumbs up that moment that 21 is going to be an encouraging year. Do we still have thumbs up after this discussion? Panel, thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs up. And I think it's the attitude that will move businesses forward, the advice we give our clients, potential clients, what we read in the newspapers and decipher what the real news is. It's going to be very important going forward. We will not have a shortage of change coming down the road. If you have any questions for the panelists, please reach out directly or through our chat room. Thank you all for participating in this very informative discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Thank you.